Hello, my name is Jerrad, and I'd like to just share my testimony with you today. And I'd like to share with you what God has done in my life. And it is quite interesting to know how good God has been to me. In fact, I was the most unlikely candidate, just like every one of us, to be saved. So, as a child, I grew up in a pretty broken home. And my mother had been in and out of many marriages. I never knew my real dad. In fact, I never even met him in my life. He almost beat my sister to death with a garden hose. And that's sort of what my life was like. I had a mother who I believe tried to love me as much as she could, but also at the same time she was an alcoholic because she was living with this pain in her life because she was sexually abused by family members when she was a little girl, and it left this pain inside of her. And growing up, around 5 years old, she married a man named Vahsholtz, and that man decided, well, since I didn't have a father and my sister didn't have a father, that he was going to adopt us. And so we took on his last name. And that lasted about 4 years. And then it ended in divorce after my adopted father, Greg, was tired of dealing with my mother's drinking problem that was going on. And he left her for another woman. And soon after that, she remarried again to another man. And this man was just as much of an alcoholic as she was. And the situation was one in which you might say that me and my sister were set up for failure. We seen them go through this night after night. They would get drunk. They would be gone. And I remember just desiring some sort of attention or affection from my mother, but she oftentimes was too busy going to the bar and different things. And it left quite this void in my life, just a desire to be recognized. And I think she did in some measure, but it really wasn't what God had desired to be within a family. And so it turned out that I then started to look for attention in places where it probably wasn't the best. Many different groups wouldn't accept me, the smart ones, the jocks, the others, because I was smaller than the rest of the kids. I was quite small when I was young. And a lot of people made fun of me. They called me gremlin and different things. I didn't care about that much. I was just looking for somebody to show me attention. And if that meant I got negative attention from people, that was fine. And that left me hanging around with people who I would say even were not the best to be around. And one of those was a young man named Jason. He was the same age as me. We went to high school together. We spent day and night with one another. And on my senior year, I was driving his car and I damaged it a little bit. He was very angry with me, asked me to leave. And I did. I left. I walked all the way home that day. And I remember specifically just thinking, boy, what's going to happen next? It was just a few days later when him and another man found me But it was because I was at this young lady's house. She was about 2 years younger than me, and she said, "Jerrad, you need to get out of here. They're looking for you." And what had happened is this other man who was very jealous that I was friends with this guy, they sought to find me. And this man, he framed me, this young man, he was jealous. And so he had stated to my friend that I saw him next to your car, but I really didn't think much about it. And they sought to find me. Well, this girl decided, well, I'm going to walk with you home. It was only about 3 blocks away. And she did. She walked with me, her and another guy. And as I was walking, these 2 men, they found me. And this friend of mine, who was supposedly a friend, found me and he gave me a 1-punch knockout. And he beat me up severely. I was thankful that these people were with me, because this young girl, she jumped on his back and said, "You're going to kill him, you're going to kill him." And so it was that she ran up to my house. I was left in somebody's yard. I was bleeding profusely. They'd stomped my face, kicked my face repeatedly. And she ran up to my house. The ambulance came and they rushed me to St. Alphonsus Hospital. And when I went into the emergency room, the doctor there was quite shocked. He was quite shocked that somebody in the condition that I was could be breathing or thinking, or I wasn't some sort of vegetable or even possibly dead. I was released from hospital after a period of time, and I spent about 3 weeks being nursed back to health by my mother in our house, and I missed many days of school. And unfortunately, they dismissed me from school. And you would think that that would really change a person's life, that something like that might wake them up. But actually, it did quite the opposite. I'd been listening to some rap music, and there was this one rap artist that talked about selling your soul to the devil, and how the devil gave power, and how he gave the ability to have fun and pleasure. And so it was that I had decided that at that point, well, if I could die any day, I might as well party and live it up as much as possible. And I had within myself said, well, maybe I better do as much as possible, because I could die. And there was this thing within my soul that even I had thought that somehow the devil had given me another chance. And so that chance was so that I can have as much fun as possible. And so for day and night, I gave myself to methamphetamines. And I was using it consistently, and I was selling it. I was manufacturing it. I was doing everything you can imagine. It became so bad that I would just go over to my mother's house and I would, just con her out of money, and I robbed my grandparents and my family, and wedding rings and power tools. It didn't matter. I left cars on the side of the street with no tires, no wheels on them. And until it all came crashing down. When one day, a lady who I'd known for several years had reached out to me, and she said, "Hey, could you please sell me some methamphetamines?" And she told me the amount she wanted. And we went down there to where she was. She said, "Could you please meet me at the Fred Meyer in Garden City?" And so we did. But it was quite interesting, because I never experienced that before. And it was almost as if something was shaking me, saying, "Don't do this. There's something wrong." I didn't understand it, but I didn't feel right about the situation. And as we pulled into the parking lot, I saw a dare van leaving the parking lot. We drove to where she was, and lo and behold, she had no problems with her vehicle anymore. And our intention was to tell her, hey, we'll meet you down the road, but never even meeting her there. So we said, hey, how you doing? And we got into our car, and as we did, it was surrounded with narcotics agents with guns pulled, like something you would see inside of a movie. And they hooked me up and took me down to the Garden City Police Department. And over there, they interrogated me and asked me different questions. And finally, after everything, I'd admitted everything I did, they put me in the back of a police car. And I remember sitting back there. It's like my whole world came crashing down. And I remember thinking to myself, boy, I've done this. And I looked up at the police officer, not ridiculing him or anything. I said, sir, I'm not mad at you. I've done this to myself. You're just doing your job. And he took me over to jail. Well, sometime later, I was released on bond. And I went right back out and did what I did before. Tried to straighten up a little bit, but I was using here or there. And that's when I decided to go and manufacture some methamphetamines. We went to Oregon. And after we were done, we were leaving the cabin up in the woods, and a car hit us. And I proceeded to take this meth lab that was in the back and run it into the forest in front of all these people. I pretended like I was injured. They took me to the hospital, and the other friends that were there with me, one of them was taken by the police to show where the meth lab was placed. Police officer asked a very interesting question. He said, why did you run? Why did you put this in the forest? We would have never checked your vehicle. And so they released us. They sent us back home, but they let us know that they were going to be testing all the substances. And if they had come back positive as something that they weren't supposed to, they would be filing charges against us. And so I was walking down the streets of Garden City about a month later or so, and a police officer stopped me and checked my ID, and he said, hey, did you know you have a warrant for your arrest out of Pendleton, Oregon? And so they arrested me. They took me over to jail, and they extradited me over to Pendleton, Oregon, where I stood before a judge after spending 5 days in jail. And they released me. They said, look, we're gonna give you probation. Over there, they give 80% of the max term for felony crimes. But since I was from out of state, they decided, well, we're gonna give you probation. We'll give you 2 years probation, $2,000 fine. If you complete this, you won't have to do the 5 years. And they let me go. It was just a few months later that now I was on felony probation in Idaho, and it was just a few months later that I went and appeared before the judge in Idaho for the charge that I had picked up when I tried to sell that 1/4 ounce of methamphetamines to the lady in the parking lot, and did not end up doing that. And so it was that when I was sentenced, I went to the jail. They sentenced me to 30 days. And as I was in that jail, I just got so tired of being inside of the dorm. I just wanted somehow to receive a way to get out of this dorm. And I kept seeing people leaving this dorm. They would go to different functions, and most of them were Bible studies. And I remember just thinking to myself, boy, if I could just get out of here. But I wasn't too interested in going to that Bible study. In fact, my grandparents had sowed some seeds that this religion was dead and worthless. So the last place I wanted to go was there. Well, I tell you what, finally, I just got tired of being in that dorm. I thought if I could just get out of this dorm, even if I could go to that Bible study, it doesn't matter to me. So I signed up. They called my name at the time of the Bible study. I went down to that room where a man shared the gospel. My friends, it was so wonderful. I I just can't even stop to think about what had transpired in that room, my friends. I went there not even looking for God, but God found me. While I was a sinner, I wasn't even interested in him. I didn't even want to hear that word, but all of a sudden, God opened the gospel up to me. And it was quite amazing because I was sitting in that place. And the change was immediate. I went back to the dorm. I could care less about a Bible. But I picked up a Bible and I just started to read, and I started to consume it and do Bible studies. I called my grandma, who was a God hater, and ridiculed the Christians down the street. I heard her do it many a times. And I said, could you send me a Bible? Boy, she was kind enough to send me a Bible. I was so happy when I got that Bible. And I was released from jail. And you know, I had this statement. I got Jesus, got my Bible, and I went to my sister's house and I said, look, I don't drink, I don't use drugs. And I did good there. I got my own house, I got a job. And after a period of time, I became so lonely. I started to call some of my old friends, and I went and hung with this one who was a really nice guy, actually, even though he was a drug addict and a drug dealer. He never was mean to people per se, but there was something about that I was drawn to, you know, but all of this was a result of me saying I don't need to go to church and trying to do Jesus my way. Yeah, I got saved. He changed me, but I don't need church. I don't need to, you know, spend time in fellowship with believers. And so it was that I ended up in this guy's house. And after a while, I just said, well, what's one hit gonna hurt? I'll tell you what, that one hit, it was like a darkness came over me. I was so trapped, and I kept going to my POs, and I just could get loose from it. And I went to my POs, and they UA'd me several times. I remember sitting there after the fifth bad UA, and my probation officer was saying, look, if I thought you were one of these other guys, I would have already took you to prison, Jerrad, but there's something different about you. And that didn't help any, because as soon as I left there, I went straight on the run. I tell you what, I sort of felt like Jonah, I think. Many times I bowed down on my knees and I cried out and I said, God, help me, save me. But I've become so numb because of these drugs that I was using. Until one day, I perceived that my girlfriend and her parents had called the police on me. And I started jumping over fences until somebody saw me in their backyard. I didn't know it. They were in the room calling the police on me. And I happened to knock on their door and say, hey, can I use your phone? They obliged that. They allowed me to use the phone. And I called a taxi. The taxi picked me up, and not even half a mile later, I was pulled over in this taxi cab. I sort of felt like Jonah in the belly of a whale. And I knew that I needed to do something different. I was so trapped in such a dark place. That officer pulled me out of the taxi, and I could have very easily said my name is Jason Wilcox or whatever. But you know what? Instead, I told him my name is Jerrad Vahsholtz. I have a felony warrant for my arrest. Take me to jail. You know, I was terrified because I knew I could go to prison for 5 years in Oregon and do prison time, at least 1 year fixed in Idaho. So they took me to jail, and I went before a judge. The judge sentenced me to a rider, and I heard nothing about my Oregon charge at that time, and they sent me on a rider. I spent 6 months up in northern Idaho in a prison. And I heard about the Boise Rescue Mission there. Somebody said, you know what, they have a really awesome Christ-based program. You know what, inside of myself, I knew that that's what I needed. I couldn't just go back out the same way I did before and expect to be successful. So I went into this program. It was a 12 to 18 month discipleship drug recovery program. And the judge was obliged to let me go there. And he, in fact, he sentenced me. I was so happy. And And I went through the doors of that rescue mission. I thought, what did I get myself into? Guys with different odors and stuff. But after about 2 weeks, the staff there supported me, walked with me, and said, hey, let's take a walk. Let's work through this. And I spent some time in that program. I remember sitting in chapel services and hearing the Word of God and hearing preachers and just saying, man, I wish I could preach like that. And this cry came into my soul because sometimes I'd read the Bible. I couldn't even remember what I was reading about because of the drugs had done a number on my mind. And I just started to cry out with this hunger to God. And God started to open His Word to me. It was so wonderful. And I remember many times being in those chapel services, seeing the preacher and hearing the Word of God and just being so blessed. And I started an internship after 10 months in that program, which lasted about 7 months. And after that, I spent a little time away from the mission. And they hired me back onto staff. And it was quite an interesting thing to be there. Because when I was working that position, there were many nights where a chapel speaker didn't show up. And I remember this very clearly. I remember that when I was in the program, I thought to myself, can't these staff just preach the Word? But instead they would wheel up what we referred to in the program as Pastor Sanyo or Pastor Panasonic. It just depended on what facility you were in. And I remember that so clearly, that there was just this stirring inside of myself to say, couldn't they just open the Word of God? And now I'm the staff. And now I'm the one that's faced with that opportunity. So I didn't put up Pastor Sanyo. I didn't put up Pastor Panasonic. I shared my testimony a couple times. And it was very wonderful to be able to do so. It was quite scary though. So this happened again, that this chapel speaker didn't show up. And I was left with the choice, I couldn't just keep sharing my testimony over and over again. I was afraid because some of the men in that room were perhaps half drunk. They'd just come in off the streets just to eat, and that was it. And they might throw something at me, I don't know. But the Lord had put a few scriptures into my heart. And I remember just thinking, if I can make it 15 minutes, I'll be happy. So it was around 10 minutes after the hour. The chapel was from 6 to 7. And at around 7:10, I finished preaching. And my friends, I stood there in shock, not even understanding where those words came from that came out of my mouth. The Bible tells us something very interesting. It says, open your mouth and I will fill it. That's what God said. And boy, I seen Him do that. I stood there in shock, and I knew that it's time to invite people to receive Jesus Christ. There was about maybe 60, 80 people in that room that day. And I said, is there anybody in this room who would want to accept Jesus Christ as their Lord? And I remember probably around 13 people raised their hand in that room to receive salvation. They came forward and I prayed with them. And boy, I tell you what, I was shocked at what God had done there. And it's interesting, very interesting to see God's faithfulness these years. It was December 2nd of 2002 when I joined the program. And April 29th of 2002, the very last day I used methamphetamines. And I haven't had one desire since. I've been preaching now for almost 15 years, and I don't know how many people I've seen come to the knowledge of Jesus Christ. And it's amazing to think about to see what God has done. But something even more amazing came to my understanding in 2007. It was when God revealed to me something about His grace. You know, He revealed this truth to me, and He said, Jerrad, you remember when you were taken into the emergency room and that doctor said you should have very well been a vegetable or dead? You know, they couldn't, just 1 week after the emergency room, I couldn't even put a hat on my head, a fitted baseball cap, because the swelling was so much in my brain. He said, you remember that, Jerrad? You see, I saw that you were going to choose me one day. I saw one day that you would receive me as Lord, that you would choose to serve me, and I was going to use you in a powerful way. So I stopped you from dying that day. And he said, you remember that time when you were driving down and there was like something shaking you? You should have very well delivered those drugs to that lady and had perhaps even up to a life sentence in the state of Idaho for the crime of delivering controlled substance. But it was me who was shaking you. It was me that put those thoughts in your heart, because I didn't want the plan that I had for you to be diverted. And when I was in the program, it came to my understanding also that, you know, I thought to myself, what happened to my Oregon probation? And I called up Oregon after my PO said, you better call them and find out what's going on. I called them up. They said, your probation has expired. And I thought, boy, what does that mean? I said, could you please tell me what that means? You know, expiring usually isn't a very good thing after all, because, you know, when people expire, they die. And he said, well, that means that you're free and clear. And God brought to my understanding, he said, Jerrad, instead of you serving 5 years in prison, very well you should have been violated, because there was a violation order sent by your PO to that judge. But they didn't violate you. You know why? Because I was working on your behalf. And instead of doing 5 years in prison, you did 5 days, because I knew that you would serve me, because I had a plan for your life, Jerrad. And I understood a very amazing truth, that even when we're yet enemies and wicked works against God that we practice, God is changing the events in our life just because of His grace. Not because we earn anything or we deserve anything, but because of His grace. What a wonderful thing, my friends. And God has grace for you. God has strength for your life. It doesn't matter how addicted or how broken you are. God wants to use you for His glory, and He wants to change your life. What an amazing thing. And now I sit here today, these almost 17 years free from drug addiction, married with 6 children. I've preached the gospel thousands of times. I've seen multitude come to Jesus Christ. And my friends, it's nothing that I did. It's everything that He did. I wasn't looking for Him. He was looking for me. He was looking for somebody that said, send me, and that was me. I said, Lord, whatever you have to do, use me. If you have to break me, if you have to crush me, Lord, use me. And He knew what I was willing to do for His name's sake. And what an amazing thing, my friends, what I have seen transpire. It's my desire that somehow this testimony has blessed you. May God bless you abundantly.